You're tuning in because you want to get a handle on something important, right?
Yeah.
To really understand the nuts and bolts without getting bogged down.
Yeah, and that's what this deep dive is all about.
Exactly. So today we're tackling a really significant moment, the Great London Plague of 1665.
A time that really throws into sharp relief just how different things were before, modern medicine and sanitation.
Totally. It's a huge example of a public health crisis, to say the least.
A massive one. And a society just grappling with something it fundamentally didn't understand.
So picture this. 17th century London, forget modern sewage systems, forget regular trash collection.
Yeah.
It was teeming, packed.
Absolutely packed. And the sources we have give us this kind of raw, unfiltered look at the conditions, the beliefs, the often desperate actions people took.
Yeah, one source even called it the deluxe sequel to the Black Death, which, wow, really paints a picture.
It certainly grabs your attention, doesn't it? It speaks to the scale.
It does.
Yeah.
So our mission today, using these sources, is to kind of unpack what made this plague tick, right?
Exactly. What factors led to it exploding like it did? What were the big misconceptions floating around?
And ultimately, what can we maybe learn from looking back at this crisis?
Precisely. What insights still resonate?
Okay, let's dive in. The setting, 17th century London. What are we talking about in terms of daily life? What did it feel like, smell like?
Okay, so imagine a city just bursting at the seams. We're talking nearly 400,000 people crammed together.
Wow, that's a lot for that time.
It really is.
Oh.
And there's virtually no waste management system as we'd understand it.
So everything just went into the streets.
Everything. Household garbage, animal waste, you name it. One source we looked at described the air as smelling of sin, mold, and regret.
Sin, mold, and regret. You can almost smell it. Grim.
It gives you a sense of the sheer squalor.
And it wasn't just the physical stuff, right? There was a whole mindset, a way of seeing the world that played into this.
Oh, definitely. Superstition was deeply ingrained. Remember that comet in 1664?
Vaguely, yeah. People saw it as a bad sign.
A major omen, widely interpreted as predicting doom. Prophecies were circulating. It created this atmosphere of anxiety and foreboding that really shaped how people reacted when the plague started.
So a city physically vulnerable, psychologically maybe primed for disaster, and then the first cases appear. Where did it actually kick off?
It seems to have started in the spring of 65. The sources point towards the port districts first.
Makes sense, with ships coming in.
Exactly, bringing goods, but also, unfortunately, rats. And the St. Giles area is often mentioned as an early hotspot. One account called it ground zero for bad vibes.
Ground zero for bad vibes. Love that. And I assume it didn't stay contained in those areas for long.
Not at all. It spread terrifyingly fast. By the peak, sort of late summer, the official death toll was hitting 7,000 people per week.
7,000 a week. Officially.
Officially. And that's a key point. Several sources, the official numbers were likely way lower than reality.
Why? People hiding deaths.
Yes, precisely. There was a huge incentive to cover it up. If plague was diagnosed in your house, the consequences were drastic. So people might claim it was an accident or, some other illness.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's get to the cause. What was actually causing it versus what did people back then think was causing it? Must have been a huge gap.
A massive gap, tragically so. We now know it was the bacterium Yersinia pestis.
Right, carried by fleas on rats.
Exactly. But that understanding was centuries away. They were operating completely in the dark, scientifically speaking.
And some of their attempts to deal with it, based on those wrong ideas, actually backfired, didn't they?
Yeah.
Tell us about the cat and dog situation.
Oh, yes. A truly monumental mistake. A tactical whoopsie, as one source rather dryly put it.
Tactical whoopsie. Okay.
Parliament, believing cats and dogs were somehow spreading the disease, ordered this mass killing of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And, of course, what happens when you kill off the predators of rats?
The rat population explodes.
Precisely. The very animals carrying the infected fleas were suddenly thriving. So a well-intentioned policy with absolutely disastrous results.
Wow. The irony is just painful. It really highlights the danger of acting without knowing the real cause.
It absolutely does. A key lesson right there.
So if they weren't blaming rats or fleas, what were the leading theories? What did they blame?
Well, it was a real mixed bag. A very common belief was bad air miasma. The idea that foul smells themselves carried disease.
Right. That persisted for a long time.
It did. Then there were supernatural explanations. Divine punishment for sins was a big one.
Okay.
The influence of that comet we mentioned, even witchcraft.
Witchcraft, really?
Yes. And then, perhaps the strangest one, there was this bizarre belief that contracting syphilis might actually protect you from the plague.
Wait, what? Syphilis as a preventative? How did that even start?
It's obscure, likely just grasping at straws in utter desperation.
Hmm.
But it shows the level of confusion and, frankly, bad information circulating.
Absolute wild. So, given these, let's say, inaccurate theories, what did the actual public health response look like on the ground? What did they try to do?
The main tool they had, or thought they had, was quarantine. Specifically, locking up entire households.
The whole family, even if only one person was sick.
The whole family.
Yeah.
For 40 days, the 40 giorni, where our word comes from, didn't matter if you were healthy, you were sealed in with the sick.
That's horrifying. Just imagining being trapped like that. What were the consequences?
Often terrible. Inside those locked houses, you had starvation becoming a real risk. Sanitation, already poor, became non-existent.
So the conditions inside would just get worse and worse.
Exactly, potentially spreading the disease faster among those trapped inside. And as we mentioned, it gave people every reason to lie to hide symptoms from the inspectors.
Yeah, you'd do anything to avoid that fate. And they marked the houses, didn't they?
They did. A large red cross painted on the door, along with the words, "Lord, have mercy on us." A very stark, very public sign of isolation.
Chilling. And with deaths mounting so rapidly, how did they even manage the bodies? 7,000 a week.
It became overwhelming. The image that sticks, of course, is the death carts.
Bring out your dead!
That exact cry echoing through the streets. Graveyards filled up incredibly quickly. They had to resort to digging huge, deep plague pits, mass graves.
Just pits full of bodies.
Yes. The scale of death was so enormous that eventually they even stopped ringing the church bells for funerals.
Why? Just too constant.
Too constant. The sound would have been almost nonstop. It was silenced out of sheer overuse.
Unbelievable. Okay, let's talk about the plague doctors. Those iconic, slightly terrifying figures with the bird masks. What's the real story there?
Yes, the beak doctors. That image is powerful, isn't it? The long leather coat, the staff, and that very distinctive mask with the long beak.
What was the idea behind the mask?
It was basically a primitive respirator based on the miasma theory. The beak was stuffed with aromatic herbs, spices, dried flowers.
To filter the bad air.
Exactly. They thought the perfumed air would protect them. Whether it actually did much is debatable. More likely, the full leather outfit offered some protection from fleas.
And were these guys actually trained physicians?
Some were, but many were not. With so many regular doctors fleeing or dying, these positions were often filled by people with little or no real medical knowledge. Some were essentially opportunists, charging high fees for questionable treatments.
So maybe not the most reliable care. What kinds of treatments were they offering?
Well, again, based on the medical theories of the time, bloodletting was very common.
Still, even then.
Oh, yes. They also tried lancing or even burning the buboes, those swollen lymph nodes, sometimes with hot irons.
Ouch, that sounds brutal.
It was. And then lots of herbal concoctions, poultices, mostly ineffective. There was even this really misguided idea of forcing children to smoke tobacco.
Smoking tobacco to prevent plague.
Yeah. The logic, as far as it went, was that it might ward off lung infections given the smell and smoke.
Yeah.
Completely wrong, of course.
Wow. Okay, you mentioned buboes a few times. Can you describe the disease itself? What were people actually experiencing?
The classic symptom of bubonic plague, the most common form, was the development of these buboes. Extremely painful swollen lymph nodes, usually in the groin, armpits, or neck. They could swell up and sometimes turn black, hence Black Death historically.
And were there other forms?
Yes. If the infection got into the lungs, it became pneumonic plague. Highly contagious through coughing. Much deadlier.
Spread person to person easily.
Very easily. And then the worst was septicemic plague, where the bacteria got directly into the bloodstream. That was almost invariably fatal and very fast.
And you mentioned summer heat made it worse.
This seems likely, yeah. Warmer weather meant more flea activity, so more transmission. The summer of 1665 was the absolute peak of the horror.
So while all this is unfolding for ordinary Londoners, what about the people at the top? The king, the court?
Well, that's a pretty stark contrast.
Yeah.
King Charles II and his court didn't stick around.
They left.
Oh, yeah. They fled London pretty quickly once the plague really took hold. Went off to the countryside, to Hampton Court, then Oxford, places deemed safer.
Leaving everyone else behind.
Essentially, yes. The vast majority of Londoners, especially the poor, had nowhere to go. They were trapped in the city. And this exodus of the wealthy also crippled the city's economy. Trade dried up. Life became even harder for those left behind.
Adds another layer of misery to the whole thing, isolation and abandonment. But eventually, the plague did subside. What turned the tide?
The key factor seems to have been the arrival of winter.
Colder weather.
Exactly. The cold weather killed off large numbers of fleas, disrupting the transmission cycle. By early 1666, the number of new cases had dropped dramatically. People slowly started to trickle back into the city.
And then, of course, 1666 brings another famous disaster for London.
Great Fire of London, yes, September 1666.
Just terrible timing. Or was there a connection? Did the fire affect the plague situation?
It's a fascinating theory, and quite plausible. While the fire was obviously devastating in itself, destroying huge swaths of the city,
It might have accidentally helped with the plague?
it's thought so. The fire destroyed many of the most densely packed, unsanitary neighborhoods where the plague had thrived. And critically, it would have killed vast numbers of rats and wiped out their habitats.
So like a really brutal, accidental sterilization of the city core.
In a way, yes. A grim silver lining, as one source put it, suggesting maybe the fire helped prevent the plague from flaring up again significantly.
Right, so once the plague had run its course and the smoke from the fire cleared, what was the final toll? How many people actually died?
The official records, the bills of mortality, logged 68,596 plague deaths.
Which we know is likely an underestimate.
Definitely. Historians widely agree the real number was much higher. Estimates usually hover around 100,000 deaths,
100,000 people.
at least. That was roughly a quarter of London's entire population at the time. Some estimates push it even higher. Just a staggering loss of life.
A quarter of the city? It's hard to even comprehend that scale. And it took centuries to figure out what really caused it all.
That's right. It wasn't until 1894, over 200 years later, that Alexander Yersin finally identified the bacterium, Yersinia pestis.
That's amazing. Such a long time.
It really underscores the slow march of scientific understanding. But that discovery, combined with advances in hygiene, understanding transmission, and of course antibiotics.
It means plague is treatable now, right?
Yes, thankfully. While it still exists in pockets around the world, prompt diagnosis and antibiotics make it very treatable today, a world away from the helplessness of 1665.
Okay, so reflecting on all this, thinking about our listeners.
Yeah.
What are the big takeaways? What lessons from this horrific episode still hold water today?
Well, some seem almost blindingly obvious now, but were clearly missed then. First, sanitation is absolutely critical.
Bad. The filth was a breeding ground.
Definitely. Second, the incredible danger of misinformation in a health crisis. Acting on bad theories like killing cats can make things much, much worse. We need accurate science.
Crucial.
And third, maybe a bit more specific but still relevant, our relationship with the urban environment and, well, rodents, as one source very bluntly put it, drawing these threads together. Sanitation matters. Rats are not desirable roommates.
Fun.
And never, ever blame the cats.
Good advice. So wrapping this up, our deep dive really shows how poor sanitation, a lack of scientific understanding, and these misguided responses created this perfect storm.
A truly devastating pandemic, yeah. And it illustrates that progress in understanding disease can be slow and sometimes learned the hardest way possible.
So the final thought for our listeners to maybe chew on.
I think it's about connecting this past event to now. How do our societies handle public health challenges today? Think about the role of accurate information versus, say, rumor or conspiracy during a crisis.
Yeah, the contrast between 17th century beliefs and modern science is huge.
It really is. It shows how far we've come, but also maybe reminds us not to take public health measures and scientific knowledge for granted. They're constantly vital for our collective well-being. Something to reflect on.